just to
Hi
confirm.
everybody, it's Andy Phillips here, and I've got John Richards, I've got Rich Honus, and Ember's on with us, and yeah, we all got our cups of tea with UK atheists, Atheism UK. Today we're going to be talking about the afterlife, and it's a conversation that we do often have as atheists, because it's obviously we as an atheist, you don't believe in God, but there are atheists that do believe in other things. You know, it's not just it's not a blanket thing. There's not a book you read and you believe everything in that. You know, there's no model for being an atheist. It's just based on one thing. Just don't believe in God. So I want to talk about some of the concepts of the afterlife and how that sort of shapes people, not just people who are religious, maybe, but how it shapes people that thought that there is somewhere to go after this one, or some life to have after this one. So does anybody want to kick off with this?
I mean, I think one of the reasons why this developed is because as human beings, you know, we have developed a self-awareness, you know, and it's a self-awareness that, you know, may not exist in other animals or other creatures. But one of the consequences of having this self-awareness is obviously we are also aware that this life ends. And for some people, that's an incredibly scary thing. For some people are very worried about death and dying, and I think this invention, because I think it is absolutely, once again, an invention of an afterlife of some description, whether that's the Abrahamic or at least Christian, Islamo-Christian version of the afterlife, because actually, oddly, that view is not necessarily shared amongst a lot of Jews. But there's the Islamo-Christian version of an afterlife, which includes a heaven and hell. Specifically, I think we're thinking about heaven because it's about, you know, the continuation of a good life after you've gone, or whether it's more Eastern concepts of an afterlife, which actually include real life in terms of things like reincarnation. So there are lots of different formats of this, but, you know, the basic idea that life goes on after we have died, I think it's an almost understandable concept. You know, it's understandable that people don't like the idea of not existing, especially after experiencing life as we are experiencing it now. I loved Mark Twain's statement saying, "Well, I was dead for millions of years before I was born, and not suffered any inconvenience for it. And, you know, I treat my impending death in the same manner." I think that is absolutely quite true, but I don't think for a lot of people it still doesn't take away that existential fear of not existing. And let's be clear, there's a difference between the fear of being dead and the fear of the process of dying, which in a lot of cases is very unpleasant. But let's keep it to the fear of being dead, the fear of not existing, the fear of oblivion, and the fear of just trying to conceptualize the idea of not existing, and it is actually really difficult to do at a conceptual level. But this idea of an afterlife and how it came about does seek to address that fear, and I can see how it is very attractive. And, you know, when we are talking to theists and they say, "Well, what have you got to offer?" And, you know, so we offer life after death. And I think, well, that's all great, but you can't prove that offer is redeemable.
Yeah, because we often get asked, you know, well, what do you have? You know, we're sometimes, I think, seen as nihilists in some way. You know, that we that every atheist, again, they pigeonhole us completely.
And we've got to be careful that we don't do the same to them as well.
Yeah, of course. But when we talk to theists about this sort of thing, we talk to people who believe in God or believe in the afterlife. When we talk to them about this sort of thing, and I have an opinion which I don't know whether it's true or not. I have no proof of what I think. It's just the way I tend to think. I think I'm quite a materialist in some ways. But I find it very difficult to explain to people who do believe in an afterlife that, there's no proof of it, and I don't really believe it. But I can't sometimes explain exactly why. It just feels like, I think it feels like that because my whole opinion of humanity is that we are animals, and we're actually no different to, a dolphin or a cat. We're just a certain type, a certain species of animal on this planet. I think we have an incredible symbiosis, or we could have an incredible symbiosis with this planet, because we're a creature that's evolved on this planet, so we must have deep connections with our Earth. And I think there's a lot of concepts behind this transcendence to something else that isn't just in religion. As I say, I know atheists who may not completely believe in an afterlife. I believe in an afterlife. I'm adamant on that. But there is a wondering in humanity that, does it all stop, or is there something else? And there's a lot of other things that go on within our lives, like, for instance, things like near-death experience, where people see things when they're dying and then coming back and reporting on what they've seen. And my opinion is it's in the mind. But we know there's a lot of atheists out there that do have opinions about the afterlife. And what do you guys think of that?
You mentioned evolved and your evolution. And I think that a fear of death is an evolved characteristic, because if evolution is driven to achieve anything, that thing is to expand the population, is to be a more successful group of organisms.
To survive, to reproduce. Yeah.
Exactly, yes. And dying is very much counter to that. It's going in the wrong direction. The population gets smaller when individuals die. So I think we've evolved to not like the concept of death and not even want to think about it. And because once you start thinking, we've evolved to be hopeful about the future. And once you stop doing that, you get depressed, you think about suicide, you eventually die, and that's counter to the mission of evolution.
Well, that's obviously you're ascribing their evolution almost a conscious mission, but I see where you're getting from, and even then, I think actually there is a limit to that, because again, the fear of death is actually, in terms of our evolutionary heritage, it's fear of dying before we have a chance to reproduce. After we've reproduced, it don't matter, which is the reason why we do actually get old, we wear out, and we die.
And so death is a necessity as well, because otherwise,
overpopulation, which in itself is actually a real issue for humanity as well at the moment, and it doesn't help with some religions wanting to go forth and multiply. But I noticed Embers wanted to come in. Embers wanted to come in.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. As soon as you're aware of your own existence, let's go back a long time. Let's go back before religion was even sort of thought of, or we actually found out that people were looking at things from some sort of religious perspective. As soon as you're aware of your own existence as humans, the next step through communication is obviously to express to each other and think in your own head. You're going to die because you actually see people die. people in your own tribe, your own family, they die. Animals die. You kill animals. So the next step is to think, what happens when I die? Now, my cat, to bring my cat up again, is aware of its own existence. Lots of animals are aware of their own existence. That doesn't necessarily mean they have the cognitive ability to actually contemplate their own death or what actually happens afterward, because they don't necessarily have any responsibilities. So that's, certainly a human trait. We don't know how far it goes in other hominids and primates. There's research going on at the minute to suggest that they might have some awareness of their own existentialism. But to stay way back in history, there's lots of archaeological evidence to show that ancient peoples all over the world have been digging tombs for their dead, and not just putting them in there, but putting them in with possessions, money, tools that they may want in the afterlife. So these thoughts were going on a long time before religion became, established in society. Call it pagan, whatever. But these things have been going on for hundreds of thousands of years.
Because you see that you see the, I mean, you were talking about there where people get buried with things that, we see that in, I saw a documentary the other day about, ancient Britons, and they did exactly the same sort of thing. And they buried their dead with things. The Egyptians did that, obviously, and other cultures have done that. And
they've even found Neanderthal burials with signs of ritual.
Yeah. So so it's obviously something which is, deep rooted in our psyche. But one thing I wanted to sort of just have a straw poll of, I guess, is, do you guys fear death? I mean, fearing dying is a natural thing, getting old and decrepit and falling to bits, which we're very near, all of us, But I mean, is it something which you genuinely fear?
It's inevitable, so you can't do anything about it. So there's no point having an attitude towards it, really.
Well, that doesn't mean you can't fear it or be terrified by it. Personally,
I fear dying, but I somehow I don't fear death. It's not something that when if I was asked that and I had to think about it, it doesn't make me fearful that I'm going to die. I mean, I know I'm going to die. So, but what makes me fearful is the process of going through that dying process, if you know what I mean. It's like going through the dying rather than the death. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Again, it's the difference of the process of dying and the being dead.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll be honest. I do have long dark tea times of the soul, as it were. When you can't get to sleep and you do, and I do have a moment. I do have a moment when I think I don't want this. I don't want this to happen to me. I'm alive now. I experience things, and some of those things are good. Some of those things are not so good. I'll be perfectly honest. I was diagnosed a few years ago with mild depression, and I've come through that. But even with that, I actually still like being alive. Thank you very much. And even when I was going through some of the darkest moments of depression, the idea of say of suicide, for example, never crossed my mind, because I don't want to be dead. I don't want to be dead. I want to carry on living. I've got things to do, but I do have moments. I do have moments when I think I don't like this. I don't like this idea at all. I don't know if I describe it as fear, but I certainly don't like the idea of not being around.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've got plans, I've got some future expectations, and it's a bloody cheek, downright rude to think that, I've been here all this time. Take that away from me. How outrageous. But it's not fear. It's just, an entitlement, a misplaced entitlement.
Yeah, I don't have a fear. I think, most people don't want to die. Some people are actually in the religious death cults, but we'll come on to that, obviously. And I think for a lot of people, I think not the fear, but the concern is not necessarily being dead, because for me as an atheist, you're dead and that is it. There is no afterlife. That's fine. There's absolutely no evidence for that at all. For me, the concern is the people who actually like me don't really want me to die, and it's those things that you're leaving behind that are going to cause sort of sorrow and grief for the people you leave behind. I mean, just things like I know it's a sort of Western thing, but just your property, all the responsibilities of utility bills and who's going to take all that, just mundane things like that. But people talk about putting your house in order before you die. So it's things like that I think are more of a concern for me than actually dying, because it's going to happen, and I don't want to live forever. I can't, because I'm just going to deteriorate anyway. So we are all going to die, even if we don't die of anything specific. If it's just old age,
conking out.
I mean, there's all sorts of things that go in your body as you get older, even if you don't have to go and see your GP for any particular reason. Well, not only do I not want to live forever, I do not want to be in an afterlife and live for all eternity. I mean, that's just ridiculous concept.
But this is the other thing. This concept of afterlife and living for eternity. I can't wrap my head around that. I mean, I mean, Christopher Hitchens sort of. I remember watching a talk by Christopher Hitchens talking about this concept of existing for eternity, and he couldn't think of anything worse. I mean, he made jokes about forever with your mother-in-law or whatever. I can't remember what the joke was, but
he also had
that mindset. It just boggles the mind that you're going to live for eternity. I'm more than happy to have my time on Earth and then just stop. It doesn't bother me, and I can't understand why people freak out so much about this. They've got to continue. There's got to be a soul, because that's where it all boils down to, this concept of a soul.
That's what concerns me. Soul, hell, heaven, purgatory, limbo. There's all these other non-evidential concepts, this baggage that's associated with an afterlife, and those things are harmful. But I love the way Pope Benedict abolished limbo some years ago.
I was about to say, limbo officially doesn't exist anymore. Oh, well, that's good, because it never actually existed. Yeah.
How did he know? He didn't have to know. He came up with the recommendation that he sent to the Pope, who, of course, issued an edict. They had got into a huddle. They had a committee to decide about limbo, because it, as you point out, it has some inconsistencies to it. And the outcome of the consultation was, we'll not have it anymore.
But see, that's an indicator that none of this is true.
Yes,
if you can just go and have a meeting and decide that something does or doesn't exist, and it has nothing to do with your religious texts or the background of your religion, all the things that have happened,
or anything to do with observation, or anything to do with observation or experimentation or actual evidence.
Yeah.
Well, the whole thing about living in eternity, either in heaven or hell, or the afterlife, or all that stuff, we know it's rubbish, because we know it's man-made religious nonsense. It's completely man-invented. So atheists don't have to worry about this in the slightest. So we don't even need to argue about it, because it's just completely man-made. It's a ridiculous concept. If somebody came up with a concept now they'd be laughed off the stage.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I've just thought of this. Yeah, we'll have an afterlife, and we'll all live happily ever after, forever and ever and ever. Apart from the fact that the universe will sort of disappear in a few billion years. Apart from that,
well, it's probably outside the universe. Going back to that other conversation we had a while ago, but what really worries me, and I think this is one of the things that really worries a lot of people, are those that do absolutely believe in this afterlife and believe in the concept of the afterlife as a paradise. Mm-hmm. And one of their ways of getting there is taking other people with them.
Yes.
I mean, to go back to the horror that was the 11th of September 2001, the people that crashed those planes actually believed what they said they believed. They believed that if they did what they did, they would go to paradise for eternity. And that is also an incredibly damaging concept, because, people have killed their children because they thought, if I do this, I'm doing my children a favor because they're getting to heaven early. Now, okay, many of these people are and were diagnosably mentally disturbed.
Yes.
But whether you're diagnosed as mentally disturbed or not, this idea still gives them the excuse to commit atrocities.
Yes.
Whether they are mentally disturbed or not. And the guys on those planes, looking at their background, looking at their history, most of them were not mentally disturbed. They just absolutely believed in what their religion taught them about the afterlife and how to get there.
Yes, and that on that side, and it needs to be said as well that it's not a basic religious thought. There are things within religious texts that point toward that, but that is the sort of thing that we're talking about fundamentalism. We're talking about manipulation of people, which I think is insidious within any organization, any cult, and religion is a cult. Let's face it. So it's very easy if you have some sort of belief that is intrinsic within your religion that there is an afterlife, and you can paint the rosiest of pictures of this afterlife and again, that sort of thing is made up because no one's been there and come back. No one's generally been there and come back. And we talk about near-death experience, but that's just the journey there. That's what people experience. But no one's actually been there and come back, so no one can know what it's like. So it has to be a made-up concept of paradise. In Islam, 24 virgins or whatever it is, and that's just for the blokes. The women get they get their husbands back. Well, I bet they're really happy with that. But but that another cannot be real, and it can only be made up, and it then can be manipulated by fundamentalists.
And just another example. I remember what was it during the Vietnam War? Where American GIs were murdering entire populations of villages, and they said, "Well, how could you do this?" He said, "Well, it doesn't matter because." We kill them all and we let God sort it out later. Those that are innocent will go to heaven, and those who aren't innocent will end up going to hell. And I thought, almost helped my God there, but my goodness, that is a terrible attitude to have. Yes. And again, it's another cause of atrocities, and that's from the point of view of another religion. Now, I know that these are extreme examples, but they happen.
Yeah, and they haven't stopped.
And they haven't stopped.
No, your example of 9/11, as the Americans call it, it's 11/9 really, but we know what they mean. That's just one big example. But something happened last week, which turns out to have been the result of radical, fundamental Islamic mania, when Sir David Amos was stabbed to death, and Ali Harbi Ali. It's been discovered he was radicalized and it was a terrorist attack.
Yeah, and he's actually I know this is going to date us, but breaking news is today he has now been charged with the murder and for other terrorist offences. And, you know, it's obviously an ideology there that has caused this individual to do what he has done. And it's absolutely awful and it's absolutely terrible. And so this concept of the afterlife, not only from you know, coming back to the concept of the afterlife in and of itself. Firstly, as we said earlier, you know, it is a ridiculous man-made concept, but it actually can be the cause of great harm. And one of the things that, you know, which is one of the arguments that I keep being told is, yes, but it also motivates a lot of people to be good, or what Greta Christina calls the Santa Claus effect. The argument from Santa Claus, if you're good, you'll get a reward. But I'm thinking, yeah, but all of the good stuff is totally negated by the bad stuff. So to argue that it causes good things is to actually ignore the atrocities. And I think if I can't ignore the atrocities, and the well, I hate using the word evil, but I think it's appropriate in the circumstances. But the evil some of these beliefs can perpetuate literally counters any of the good that they could do. But more important to me is always been, well, what's the truth behind it? And there's no truth behind it. It's untrue. It causes untold suffering. The good, the so-called good that it could promote is irrelevant and immaterial at this point. It's untrue. It causes harm. We need to get rid of it from the human psyche.
Is it the view, I guess, of people who believe in the afterlife that you can have a good life? I mean, I'm not talking about fundamentalism here. I'm just talking about normal people in the normal religion. They have, they live their life. They do good things as much as they possibly can. They help other people, blah, blah, blah. But they're all, is it just this, like a cushion that at the end of that time, you will go to somewhere better? I mean, it's also, you know, we have relatives. I mean, I've had relatives, my mum and dad are now passed on. See, I use that word, passed on. To what? Yes. It's a phrase that is in, you know, common parlance.
From existing to not existing.
Because sometimes I don't want to say my mum and dad are dead. You know, I want to, you know, when I think about my mum and dad, I want to soften just the verbiage around it, you know. So, but they're both gone now, and especially when my mum died in hospital, you know, I felt as if it was good for her, because she was a Christian, to think while she was dying that she is going somewhere better. And I'm not a bastard, and I'm not going to sit by a deathbed and sort of say, well, actually, Mum, you're not. It's not, you know, there's nothing there.
This is it.
That would be a terrible thing for me to do as a son. You know?
Yeah. That is the trouble with the idea of an afterlife. It devalues the real life. So you can get away with anything here because it's not really important. You're going to there, which is somewhere better. I was going to ask.
You can see that side of it, though, John, can't you? You know, where you don't want to sort of burst anybody's delusion of there is something, you're going somewhere different. Even though in yourself you know that, or you think, because we don't know, we haven't got a clue.
Well, I can tell a story similar to that, because my first wife died in what's it called, the cancer hospital. I was there with her when she died, and we had to fill in forms. I can't remember why. It was over 20 years ago now.
Another inevitability of life.
Well, but she was a Christian, raised in a Christian family. She knew I wasn't a believer. And so when it came to filling in this form about, you know, access to some treatment, which you have to give permission to, and there was a faith question there, she looked at me and she said, I'm going to put humanist.
Wow. What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, she I suppose that she'd come to the conclusion that there was no God.
Wow,
We can't ask her now, I'm afraid.
that's pretty heavy.
It is. I was going to ask Embers if, like me, Embers, do you ever get accused of, not having any morals, and compared to Pol Pot and Stalin, who did all these bad things because they had no belief? They were atheists.
I used to, but people know better than to do that these days. So I haven't been bothered with that for years at all. So it's not an issue for me. And if you do that, I will jump down your throat now.
But again,
whereas before, I would let it go, but not now.
I mean, and you also have that argument, that some certainly some forms of Christianity peddle that was, well, actually, if they turned around and repented on their deathbed and accepted Christ as their personal Lord and Savior on their deathbed, they're in heaven now. But the good person that's done good things for their community all their life, but has never believed in Jesus, doesn't matter how good they were, they're now roasting in hell purely because of that. Yeah. And those concepts of the afterlife are also absolutely disgusting. And
breaking news today, associated with the murder of Sir David Amos, is the want by the Catholic clergy to be classed as an emergency service, to go to people in those circumstances.
Yeah, it's the last rites thing, isn't it?
Yeah, the last rites to go into a crime scene like that, where somebody's been stabbed multiple times, to give the last sacrament. I'm sure it'll give some people comfort, but it's
the priest was complaining
unnecessary.
Yeah,
the priest was complaining that he wasn't allowed in because the medics were there trying to save the life. It's ridiculous.
And it's also a crime scene. If I'm dying because something very bad's happened to me, the only people I want there is the paramedics and the police.
I mean, could you imagine if you have an accident as an atheist, like one of us, we have an accident, we're laying on a pavement somewhere in South London with a knife sticking out of us, and suddenly this priest rushes up and starts giving you last rites. I'd have to summon all my might to tell him to bugger off, and I don't really want
useful.
That. I don't really want to have to do that as well as trying to survive.
Give me a doctor.
But most councils, as you know, if animals get injured and they're lying in the gutter, the council is not responsible for coming along and collecting dead cats, dead foxes, dogs, yes, or dead atheists. They'll just leave them there.
Yeah.
One thing I want to sort of look at as well is this concept of near-death experience, because I've been reading quite a lot about it recently, and you see a lot of people talking about this near-death experience, the thing they experience as they die, and then they're brought back, obviously, maybe either by luck or by medication, being in a hospital and stuff like that. And it's pretty consistent about the sort of things they talk about, and it's often used as evidence that there is something beyond. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it, because there's been a lot of research into near-death experience, and there was I can't remember the guy's name now, Pierre someone or other, but he's a French doctor who was a military doctor, and he was the first one to sort of start talking about this concept of near-death experience, because he heard these things from some of the soldiers, and that was it's in the 17th century. I mean, it was a long time ago. So it's been around a long time. We see this quite often on on TV programs where people talk about near-death experience. So there's no doubt that it does actually happen to people, but it's actually used as this proof almost by religious people to say that this just goes to show you exactly what is happening, because there's a lot of things like the tunnel of light and all those sort of things that people see, and I have no doubt that they experience that. There's no doubt that people do actually experience these things, otherwise it wouldn't be so consistent for so long. I mean, they obviously have presuppositions, and I guess what happens within the mind that they'll associate it with, their religion, and the mind will sort of maybe paint some pictures of that. Do you have any
religion?
Sorry,
only of their religion. They won't paint any
only
pictures.
of their religion, because you have presuppositions, and your mind sort of gives you the comfort of whatever it is that you are part of. But there's also a lot of research into psychedelic drugs that do the same, or people have experienced very, very similar things to that. You got dimethyltryptamine, DMT experiments that have been happening right from sort of the 60s, and they're happening right now in universities that show these same sort of experiences, which is why I have a feeling that it is the same type of thing. It's a psychedelic sort of experience that takes you from.
It's an altered brain state, isn't it? It's an altered brain state, and I think again, going back to one of the things you said. Firstly, let's deal with a slight bit of terminology here. It's a near-death experience.
Yeah,
it's not a death experience. These people have not died. When you die, that is defined as the permanent cessation of biological functions. You don't come back from death. Yeah, you don't. Death is the permanent condition. So these ideas of, I was dead for 2 minutes, is it? No, you weren't actually dead. You were in a state of near death.
Yeah.
You were brought back, which means that you weren't dead. So that's the first point. So people have not come back from being dead. I know that's technical. The second thing is, one of the things that we now know in terms of your consistency, it's a consistent trait of oxygen starvation to the brain. It's been examined, it's been measured, experiments on this have been taking place before the development of ethics. And so the idea is now that you could do oxygen starvation experiments. You probably couldn't do that anymore. But in the days when they could, the results were remarkably consistent. Thirdly, even the visions that people saw. So again, the tunnel of light is a pretty consistent effect of oxygen starvation to the brain. It's happened in pilots, say, for example, that were pulling high G maneuvers. So it's happened there as well. So the tunnel of light, that's pretty much well established now. The experiences that people have in terms of the people that they see at the other end of the tunnel, people who are exposed to particular religions, again, it's the presupposition thing again.
Yeah.
They experience what they have been primed to experience. Somebody who was a devout Muslim doesn't tend to see Jesus.
Indeed.
People who are devout Christians don't tend to meet Muhammad. Hindus tend to meet gods from their pantheon, and they don't tend to meet Jesus or Muhammad or whatever. So that tends to suggest to me that, again, it's a function of the brain, because it's the things that person's brain is exposed to. And again, when it happens to atheists, there is a tendency either not to experience anything like that, or to experience the religions or religious figures in the culture that they have grown up within. So again, that's more of a suggestion. This is actually a cultural phenomenon, and a cultural phenomenon is actually a physical brain state.
Yeah, there are some things that been reading about that are that people who are Christian, for instance, don't see Christ. You know, it's not always the same way.
Yeah, it's not always the same way. And
but what they do see is they do see entities. They do see figures, and they are beckoning or trying to help people, what a religious person would call across to the other side. But the thing that interested me, and I encourage you to have a look at this, but these experiments with psychedelics, which they started to bring in because it was a treatment for depression. You know, they were looking at psychedelics, whether it could treat depression. So they use things like LSD and sort of derivatives of LSD. But when they started using DMT, this dimethyltryptamine, they got exactly the same, or the same nature of the reports were coming back of the same sort of concept as a near-death experience. So that tunnel of light, and the entities and all those sort of things. And if you listen to someone who's talking about a near-death experience, and you listen to someone who's talking about a DMT trip, because that's what they do in the research, you get a really, really similar report back of exactly what that's happening. And so the research is basically saying that there is when you die, there is a flood of serotonin type or tryptamine type drugs that going on, and it's like your last gasp, your last hurrah, the final curtain call. This is the thing that humans can do or do when they die to ease that death. You know, you get covered in a warm blanket of love, and you see this light, and you see entities, and maybe it's just the way that the brain copes, because when we die, all our functions close down, you know, our heart and liver and all that sort of thing, but the brain carries on for a little bit. You know, it's about 5 minutes, something like that. And so what they're thinking now is that those near-death experiences are actually just, you know, floods of. There's no evidence that it's DMT, but it's maybe a serotonin or a tryptamine.
It's chemicals in the brain.
Flood that just floods the brain on death, and you get the biggest light show ever before you go.
I can see a rise. I can see some wry smiles from Embers, who is, let's face it, for want of a better expression, he is our brain expert.
Well, I'll give you some personal experiences of that. It's like the end of the tunnel thing. I've had that 4 times in my life through serious accidents. None of them would have killed me, but I was seriously injured on each occasion. And the light at the end of the tunnel for me happened exactly the same every time. It was because I was coming round from a general anaesthetic. And anybody who's had a general anaesthetic will probably report exactly the same sort of thing. So as your functions and your brain and all your other your eyes, it takes a little while for your eyes to come round and focus your senses. There's a little tiny bit, it's you know, no more than a couple of seconds, but when you're coming round, it seems like an eternity. Sorry to use the word eternity. Where, because your eyes are getting back into focus, you see this light. And it does look like a tunnel because your vision has to kick back in. And it's not a tunnel, it's the lights of the bloody operating theatre above you shining in your eyes. And the people who are beckoning you are all the surgeons and the nursing staff standing around you, but they're not in focus yet. That's why you can get, you know, that sort of experience. And for a tiny bit before all your brain functions kick in. It's not just your brain; it's your central nervous system as well. Remember?
Yeah.
So they're all linked, and it takes a bit of time. And in that short period, you don't know where you are. You really don't know where you are. So you could be somewhere else, but it doesn't take long before. Oh, here I am in an operating theatre, and saying, "Oh, this is what's happened to you."
So what we're basically
sort of coming round from, I think I've been given morphine, in fact, because I was in the ICU unit, having had cardiac surgery. And when I was coming around, you talk about seeing visions, Jesus or Muhammad or whatever. Guess who I saw? I saw all you atheists. Hitchens, Dawkins, Dennett, and the other guy, Harris.
So basically, I mean, to summarize basically what we're saying, firstly, what evidence that has been supplied by religionists for an afterlife all seem to be traced back to, they don't provide actual evidence of an afterlife. All they're actually doing is providing evidence of this altered brain state when the brain is in distress of some kind. And the evidence for that is remarkably consistent across the board, which does suggest to me that this so-called evidence for an afterlife is nothing more than evidence of an actual consistent physical process.
Yeah.
The afterlife itself. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, do you remember a few years ago, this enhanced experience due to lack of oxygen in a brain was being put to use by people who pleasured themselves with a bag over their head, to make it even better. One person, he was actually a Tory MP.
Stephen Milligan.
Was it?
Stephen Milligan, yeah. I remember the case.
He didn't take the bag off quickly enough, and it was the last masturbation he did.
Yeah. That was he was the MP for Christchurch, I believe.
Yeah.
How that was a long time ago. That was a long time ago.
What was she saying about the afterlife, Rich?
So what we're saying is, what evidence is provided is not evidence for an afterlife. We have no evidence for it at all, and in fact, all evidence seems to suggest that once the brain is shut down, that is it. Nobody has ever come back, and we can trace through ideas about dying and death, and the concepts of not existing, is that this idea of an afterlife is almost certainly 100% man-made. There's no evidence for it. There's no reason to believe that it is actually true, and it is just another one of those religious inventions which we can dismiss in terms of it being a religious experience. We can carry on exploring the physical experiences that people have when their brains are in that condition, and as long as it can be done ethically, I think those experiments should continue as we get to learn more about how this lump of blancmange inside our head actually works. But as a religious concept, I think we're done with it.
Well, I mean, you can link this to, say, the Victorian craze with mediums and contacting the dead and having seances. People really believe they could talk to the dead. But I'll tell you what, I'll make you a promise now. I always carry postage stamps in my wallet. So if there is an afterlife, I will definitely send you a postcard.
On that note.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's been fantastic. It's been really a fascinating conversation, and something to ponder on. But don't, if you're watching this and you're a theist, don't think we're nihilists. We're just sort of trying to work out.
I believe lots of things, and I believe in trying to make the world a better place. I believe in trying to encourage people to be happy and to be productive and to do things that make them feel good.
And the most important time, if you want to make any sort of impression on any sort of existence, is while you're alive, because there is nothing else.
Yeah.
So it's really important that you have a great life now and do the best things you can possibly do now, which I think is probably a good place to leave it. Anyway, guys, been fascinating talking. If you like what we do here, just subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you can let us know, or we can let you know when we go out again. And until next time, we'll see you all later. Bye.
See you all soon.
Bye.
Well, thanks for joining us today, and don't forget to click that like button. Also, make a comment, and of course, subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time.